She said it quietly, like she was commenting on the weather. "So you're the reason my daughter stopped seeing anyone." I was holding a paper plate with a half-eaten piece of cornbread on it, standing in the middle of Claudette's backyard during her mom's retirement party. And her mother, this small, calm woman named Vivienne, who I had met maybe 4 times in my life, was looking at me like she'd just solved something she'd been working on for a long time. Not angry, not accusatory, just settled. Like she'd finally placed a name to a face she'd been carrying around in her head. I didn't know what to say. I think I said sorry, but she'd already turned to refill her glass of iced tea. I stood there for another 3 or 4 seconds, alone, watching the backyard full of Claudette's relatives laugh and move around each other in that easy way families do, and my brain just stalled. Like a car in January that doesn't quite want to turn over. That was 4 years ago. And I still think about the way she said it. Not the words exactly, but the calmness of it. The way she didn't wait for my reaction. She wasn't trying to start something. She was just stating a fact that apparently everyone else had already figured out except for me and Claudette. I should back up. I met Claudette in second-year university at Dalhousie in Halifax. It was October and it was already gray and cold the way Atlantic Canada gets gray and cold. Not dramatically, just persistently. And I was in a study room in the Killam Library trying to understand a marketing textbook that I am convinced was written specifically to be unreadable. She sat down across from me without asking, opened her laptop, and didn't say anything for 45 minutes. Which honestly I respected. When she finally spoke, she leaned over and pointed at my notes and said, "You spelled segmentation wrong 3 times." And then went back to her screen. I looked at my notes. She was right. I fixed it. And then because I was 20 and apparently had no instinct for self-preservation, I said, "You've been looking at my notes this whole time." She said, "Hard not to. Your handwriting is very large." I don't know why that made me laugh as hard as it did. But it did. And she laughed too. Just a little. In this way that was like she was surprised, she found it funny. And after that, we just started talking and we didn't stop for about 3 hours. Her name was Claudette Marois. She was from Moncton originally, half francophone on her mother's side, studying communications, and she had this quality that I noticed immediately and couldn't stop noticing. She always said exactly what she meant. Not rudely, just directly, like she'd cut out the step where most people dress a thought up before presenting it. I wasn't used to that. I grew up in a house where my dad would spend 10 minutes working up to asking if he wanted more pasta. Claudette would just say, "I think you're wrong about that. Here's why," and then move on. No performance around it. We became friends fast. The way you do in university when you're away from home and a little unmoored and someone just clicks into place like they were supposed to be there. By November, we were studying together 3 nights a week. By January, she was the first person I tested when anything happened, good or bad or just mundane, the kind of thing where you think I need to tell someone this. She'd come to my basketball games even though she had no interest in basketball, and would spend the whole time reading on her phone, and then at the end say something like, "You had a good second half." That one guy on the other team was very aggressive. I didn't like him. It sounds like nothing when I write it, but it was everything at the time. After second year, we both stayed in Halifax for the summer. We worked opposite schedules. She was hostessing at a restaurant in the North End. I was doing a landscaping job out in Timberlea. But we'd overlap on weekends, and we fell into this routine of Saturday mornings at this bakery on Agricola Street, where they made these cardamom buns that were worth reorganizing your life around. We'd sit there for 2 hours and just talk about everything. Our families. What we actually wanted to do with our degrees, whether we were going to stay in the Maritimes or go west, or go to Toronto like everyone else seemed to. She wanted to work in public communications, maybe government, maybe nonprofit. She cared about things in a way that wasn't performative. That was rare. That summer, I went on a few dates with someone I'd met through a mutual friend. Nothing serious. It fizzled out naturally after a month or so. What I remember is telling Claudette about it and her asking these very precise questions, not gossipy, just genuinely trying to understand the situation. And then she said, "It sounds like you like the idea of her more than the actual person." And she was right. I knew she was right the second she said it. I didn't think about what it meant that her read on my life was that accurate. We graduated. I moved back to Dartmouth, across the harbor from Halifax. Close enough to stay connected to the city, far enough that my rent was something I could manage on an entry-level salary. I got a job at a small communications firm doing content work. Claudette stayed in Halifax and got a position at a provincial nonprofit doing outreach coordination. We were 20 minutes apart, which felt important. We kept up the Saturday mornings mostly. Not every week, but close enough. Her bakery became a rotating thing. Sometimes Agricola, sometimes a place on Quinpool, sometimes just coffee at her apartment while she complained about her landlord, and I half listened while looking out her kitchen window at the harbor. This is the part I have trouble explaining even now. We weren't dating. It was never framed as that, never discussed as that. But if you had watched us from the outside, and apparently many people did, it looked like something. She was the person I called when I got a promotion and when my car needed repairs I couldn't afford, and when my grandfather got sick and I didn't know how to be useful to my dad during it. She was the person whose opinion I actually cared about when I bought something or made a decision or wondered if I was being an idiot about something. And I was, I think, the same for her. I knew her deadlines before she told me they were coming up. I knew that she needed to be left alone for the first hour after work and then wanted to talk. I knew she had a complicated relationship with her dad and didn't need advice about it, just to say it out loud sometimes. I knew she preferred window seats, hated parking parkades, and would always claim she wasn't hungry and then eat half your fries. We both went on dates occasionally. She more than me, probably. Nothing seemed to stick for either of us. I remember being vaguely relieved when things didn't work out for her, which I told myself was just that I wanted her to find someone right for her, and these people clearly weren't. I didn't look at that thought more closely. I should have. About a year after graduation, she told me that a guy she'd been seeing, 3 or 4 dates, sounded promising. Had asked her why she talked about me so much. Not jealously, she said, just curiously. He'd said, "It sounds like you're already in a relationship, just not with me." She laughed telling me this. I laughed too. Neither of us said anything else about it. Year 3 post-graduation. I was 25, she was 25. We were both a little more tired and a little more settled than we'd expected to be at this point. In the way the mid-20s can feel like you're running slightly behind some schedule no one actually told you about. Her mom, Vivienne, retired from the school board in June, and Claudette threw her a backyard party at the house she'd grown up in, over in Moncton. I drove the 2 hours without really questioning whether I'd go, because of course I'd go. It was Claudette's mom's retirement party. I knew a few people there. Her brother Philippe, who I'd met a couple of times and who communicated mostly through meaningful eyebrow movements. Her Aunt Suzanne, who asked me every time she saw me what I did for work, and then immediately forgot the answer. A couple of Claudette's university friends I recognized but didn't know well. I was getting food from the table, cornbread, obviously, when Vivian appeared beside me. She was the kind of woman who seemed like she had always been comfortable in her own skin. She had Claudette's eyes, and Claudette's way of just saying things plainly, which I suppose is where Claudette had gotten it from. She looked at me for a moment and then she said it. Quietly. No drama. "So you're the reason my daughter stopped seeing anyone." And then she picked up a bread roll and moved on. I didn't find Claudette for a while after that. I finished my food. I talked to Felix, who gave me a very slow, very deliberate look when I found him near the fence, like he was confirming something. I helped Suzanne find her phone, which was in her pocket. Normal party things. But Vivienne's sentence was just running on a loop in my head. "So you're the reason." Past tense. A conclusion, not a question. I found Claudette near the back of the yard, leaning against the fence with a glass of something pink, talking to someone I didn't know. When the other person drifted off, I came to stand beside her. She looked at me and said, "You okay?" Which was the wrong question. Or the right question. I wasn't sure. I said, "Your mom said something to me." She went still. Just slightly. The way someone goes still when they know what's coming and have been half waiting for it. She said, "What did she say?" I told her, word for word, and I watched her face do this thing where she was trying very hard not to react in a way that would reveal something, and she was not completely succeeding at it. She said, "She shouldn't have said that." I said, "Is it true?" She looked at her glass for a while. She said, "Callum, it's a strange thing, hearing your own name said like that. Just your name, but with everything stacked behind it." We didn't resolve it that night. The party kept going. Her aunt needed a ride home. Felix cornered me near the car at the end and said, very quietly, "For what it's worth, I think she's been waiting for you to grow a brain for about 3 years. and then he slapped me on the shoulder and went back inside. I drove home to Dartmouth alone. 2 hours of Trans-Canada, dark and flat with the radio on low and my head doing that thing where it's reviewing every moment of the last 3 years through a different lens. The Christmases where I'd shown up at her family gatherings because going home to Dartmouth felt incomplete without seeing her first. The January she'd had a terrible week at work, and I'd driven over on a Tuesday with soup. Actual soup I'd made. Which I never do because I knew it was what she needed and I didn't think twice about making it. The way I'd stopped being interested in anyone I dated, not because something was wrong with them, but because the comparison I was running every single time was completely unfair. I thought about a night the previous fall, at her apartment, when we'd both had a glass of wine and we were watching something on her couch, and she'd fallen asleep against my shoulder and I just stayed. For an hour. Not moving. Telling myself I didn't want to wake her. Right. I called her 2 days later. I almost didn't. There's this thing that happens when you're standing at the edge of something that could change everything. You start calculating how much you have to lose. 7 years of easy, reliable, good, against a conversation that might make things permanently weird. I spent a full morning talking myself in and out of it. I called. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I've been thinking about what your mom said." She said, "Me too." Silence for a moment. Not awkward, just loaded. I said, "I think she was right. And I think I've been slow. About a lot of things that should have been obvious." Another silence. She said, "How slow are we talking?" I said, 3 years at least, probably more. She made this sound that was almost a laugh. It wasn't quite. She said, "I'd say 4." I didn't know what to say to that. I said, "I'm sorry I took this long." She said, "Don't apologize for it. Just don't keep going." A pause. "Okay?" I said okay. We went for dinner the next weekend, at a place in Halifax on Barrington Street that we'd been to probably a dozen times before as friends. It felt different and the same simultaneously, which is disorienting in the best possible way. She wore this blue dress I'd never seen before. I noticed that I noticed. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the situation, not about what to call it or what it meant. Just talked, the same way we always had, except that there was something under it now that didn't have to be ignored. She made fun of me for how long I'd taken. I deserved it. I made fun of her for not saying anything either. She conceded the point. At the end of the night, outside, before she got in her car, she looked at me and said, "We're doing this, right? We're not going to be weird about it." I said no. We weren't going to be weird about it. She said, "Good," and she drove away. I walked to my car and sat in it for a minute before starting it. Just sat there. Halifax in the evening, lights on the water across the harbor. Feeling something very simple and very solid. That was 3 years ago now. We're living together in Halifax, South End, a place with a good kitchen and a view of the Northwest Arm that we both pretend not to care about and absolutely do care about. She's working for a provincial communications office. I moved to a remote content role that I like more than I expected to. We still do Saturday mornings, just closer. Her mom came to visit in February. She stayed for a long weekend. On the last morning, Vivienne sat at our kitchen table drinking coffee and looking out at the water, and she said to me, very casually, "You know I planned that." I said, "I know." She smiled, just slightly. I didn't tell her it had taken me 2 more days after the party to actually call. I figured some things didn't need to be added to the record. Claudette overheard from the hallway and said, "Mom, oh my God." But she was laughing. I think I knew, on some level, for a very long time. I just needed someone to say it out loud, calmly, without making it a big thing. The way you'd state something that had been obvious all along and just needed someone finally to confirm it. Claudette says she knew before I did. I have no reason to argue with that. I keep coming back to the cornbread. Not because it matters, but because that's where I was standing when everything shifted, holding a paper plate, completely unprepared, while a woman I barely knew said the truest thing anyone had said to me in years, and I almost missed it. I almost wrote it off as a strange comment from someone's mom at a retirement party and just went back for more potato salad. That's the thing about the moments that actually change your life. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with music. Vivienne didn't pull me aside or lower her voice or make it a whole thing. She said what she saw, plainly, and walked away. and what she saw was something I had been choosing not to look at directly for the better part of 4 years. I think about the choices that led to that afternoon a lot. Not with regret exactly, more like with a kind of clear-eyed honesty I didn't used to be capable of. Every time I'd met someone and quietly measured them against Claudette and found them lacking, every time I'd felt that small, private relief when something didn't work out for her. Every time I told myself the story that we were just friends, as if a story repeated often enough becomes true. Those weren't passive things. They were choices. Small, daily, unconscious ones. But choices. Small, daily, unconscious ones. But choices. And they had consequences for both of us that I wasn't accounting for because I wasn't willing to be honest enough with myself to look. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not that I'd wasted time, though I had, but that I'd been so determined to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty that I just opted out of the whole question. I'd taken the warmth of what we had and treated it like a thing I could keep indefinitely without ever deciding anything about it. That wasn't fair to Claudette, and it wasn't honest. And somewhere underneath the convenience of it, I think I knew that. What Vivian's comment did, what made it cut through when 4 years of my own thinking hadn't, was that it made the thing visible. You can avoid a question you're not asking yourself. You can't as easily avoid one that's been asked out loud by a retired school board administrator who has your number and no particular reason to soften the blow. After I called Claudette, after we had that dinner, after everything settled into what it's become, I realized the thing that had actually been required of me wasn't cleverness. I'd spent years being smart about logistics and strategy and career stuff. I was not smart about this. What it required was simpler and harder to be honest with myself about what I actually felt. To be decent to another person by not letting the ambiguity drag on because it was comfortable for me, and then to do something about it even though I couldn't guarantee the outcome, to make the call not knowing for certain how it would land. That last part is the part I think about most. Not the ending. The ending is good. I'm aware the ending is good. But the moment of picking up the phone, sitting in my apartment in Dartmouth with the number already pulled up and talking myself into it, that required something. I want to remember that it required something. Because the things that end up mattering in your life, the ones you'll still be thinking about decades from now, usually do. Claudette was right that she knew before I did. I believe her completely. But I also think she waited, not because she was passive, but because she understood something I was still learning, that you can't do the work for someone else. You can hold space. You can be present. You can, if you're Vivienne, say the precise right thing at a retirement party and then go get a bread roll. But in the end, the person who needed to figure it out was me.